Yeah, can you get them?
Okay, sure.
They're first up.
You good?
Good evening. It's 6 p.m. on Tuesday, December 7th, 2021. I'd like to call tonight's meeting of the Sutton Select Board to order. As we always do, we're going to start off with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, thank you. Next up, we have the hybrid blurb. Pursuant to Governor Baker's March 12th, 2020 order suspending certain provisions of the open meeting law, this meeting of the Sutton Select Board is in a hybrid format with both in-person and a Zoom component. To join the meeting, visit www.zoom.us/join and enter meeting ID number 881-7992-9834. And the passcode is 261626. This meeting will be broadcast and recorded on local public access stations, Verizon Channel 31 and Charter Spectrum Channel 191, and live streamed on the town's YouTube channel when available. All right, next up, we have to do the roll to determine whether we are physically here or zooming in.
David Hall, present.
Wendy Mead, present.
Jonathan Anderson, present.
Jeff Bannon, present.
And Jesse Lemanik is physically present. All right. Next up, we have public forum, limited to 5 minutes per topic. Discussion or comments about town employees or agency members shall be avoided so as not to violate individuals' rights. Well, seeing how Tim is the only one present, I'm assuming no one is here this evening for public forum. And I don't see anyone on Zoom. So why don't we move on to the minutes?
Mr. Chairman, I move to approve as presented the November 16th, 2021 Select Board meeting minutes.
Second.
All right, hearing a motion and a second. Any other comments, concerns, questions? All right, why don't we do a roll call vote?
David Hall, aye.
Wendy Mead, aye.
Jonathan Anderson, aye.
Jeff Bannon, aye.
And Jesse Lemanik, aye.
Mr. Chairman, I move to approve as presented the November 29th, 2021 Select Board meeting minutes.
Second.
Hearing a motion and a second. Any other comments, questions, concerns? Why don't we do a roll?
David Hall, aye.
Wendy Mead, aye.
Jonathan Anderson, aye.
Jeff Bannon, aye.
And Jesse Lemanik, aye. Both passes unanimously. Thank you. All right, now as for our regular scheduled agenda items, currently we have a public hearing scheduled for tax classification, but I do not see the assessors present. So do we want to move ahead and deal with the license renewals, or?
Yeah, let's do that. Let's just move ahead.
Probably makes
Sure,
sense.
yeah.
Or is that them? All right, if that's them, then why don't we start off with Jonathan reading in the description into the paper.
All right. As posted in the November 25th, 2021 Millbury Sutton Chronicle, public notice, tax classification hearing. In accordance with Mass General Law, Chapter 40, Section 56, as amended, the Sutton Select Board will hold a public hearing on Tuesday, December 7th, 2021 at 6 p.m. at the Sutton Town Hall, 4 Uxbridge Road, Sutton. The purpose of this meeting is to determine the percentage of tax burden to be borne each class of property for fiscal 2022. This will be an in-person meeting with a Zoom option. To join the Zoom, please use meeting ID 881-7992-9834 with a passcode 261626. The Sutton Board of Assessors will be in attendance to provide information relevant to making such determination and the fiscal effect of the available alternatives.
All right, thank you very much. I'd like to declare the public hearing open. So Jim, if you would, start us off.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The assessors are here to address any questions. The board has historically, I think since we've been considering this, always considered a single classification factor, a single rate, taxing businesses and residential at the same rate. It's shown its benefit from all the recent business activity, particularly Prime Metals that moved from the city of Worcester after 100 years of being located there. And one of the main factors they said was that the single rate in Sutton. where Worcester was charging $36 per thousand, we were at $16 per thousand. So a massive tax bill abatement just by relocating their facilities. So I'll turn it over to the assessors if there are no other issues.
Perfect, thank you. Good evening.
Good evening. I'm Robert Nunnemacher, and this is Ray Nichols. Both of us are the two part-time assessors. Joyce Sardinal is the full-time assessor, and she is responsible for all this work that goes into the creation of the tax rate. The tax rate is created by developing values of the town that are reviewed by the Department of Revenue for consistency and consistency within the town and consistency through other towns in the Commonwealth. We also have the input from the town manager and the town accountant as to how much money we need to raise every year. And it's really a simple fraction. You divide the total amount of money that we need to operate the town and divide it by the total value of the town to come up with a tax rate. That is really a generalization, but that's essentially what happens every year. This year, you can see from your sheets you have there the different values of the town. The residential portion of the town, the single-family homes, the condominiums, the apartments and such, make up about 86% of the value of the town, with the remaining portion, the remaining 13% being made up by the commercial properties, businesses, industrial, stores and the like, and all the chapter land that we have in town. Every year we get from the Department of Revenue the maximum of levy that the town can raise, and that's the amount of money that we get vote every year at town meetings, developed by the town manager and others. And also added to that is our debt payments, such as the school and other things that are added in there. And then the maximum amount of levy that the town can do is $26,668,279. So if you divide that by the total value of the town, you end up with a tax rate of 15.18, which is a considerable drop from last year. Last year it was $16 a thousand. But if you have noticed at all the sales of property that have occurred this year, but they actually occurred the previous year before, additionally, because we are always a year behind in values when we do our calculations, and that's per the regulations of the Department of Revenue. They look at sales in calendar year 2020. That's how we come up with the values of the town. So the value of the town went up. The amount of money that we are spending went up, but the overall effect was a considerable drop in the tax rate. Lest you think that everything is good, when you say the tax rate makes a big drop like that, considering the five of you, Jim Smith, and the three of the boards of assessors, all our values went up in the past year, about 10% as an average. And our taxes went up 4.6%. That's just the group of us here, which is a pretty diverse group of people in different kinds of homes in town. That's if we adopt a single tax rate, as Jim had said. Your purpose in a tax classification hearing is to determine whether we're going to shift the tax rate. The commercial, industrial, and the personal property portion of the value of the town, their tax burden can be increased by 50%, and there's a corresponding reduction in the residential tax rate and tax burden. Essentially, if we did you can go from a 1, which we are, a 1 ratio as we are now, or have been in the past, and make it to 150%. The changes in the different values are substantial. The average single-family home of the approximately 3,000 single-family homes that we have in town is $430,000 about. So if we use that $430,000 as a basis and consider a $430,000 commercial property at the same time, making the maximum shift of 150, the commercial property taxes would go up $3,264, while the corresponding value of a residential home, their taxes would go down $525. So you can see there's a considerable shift there, and I personally would agree with Jim's assessment as why we've kept that way and the effect that it's had in the town. So if there are any other questions you have, we would try to help you.
Excellent. Thank you, Nick. Ray, do you have anything to add? Or?
No, I think Nick pretty much covered everything, so.
All right. I just wanted to give you a shot. You there after all.
Thank you.
All right. Wonderful. Dave, do you have any questions for Nick or Ray?
Yes, thank you. First of all, thank the two of you, and for Joyce. I understand that some of these numbers necessary to calculate this stuff was not available until maybe a little bit more than an hour ago, so appreciate you putting this all together for us and being able to come up and give us a presentation. And, you know, sort of cutting to the end, as I have for the last, I don't know how many years, I fully support staying with the single tax rate and not splitting, so I'll start with that. A couple of questions, though. I think what you told us is that the really big rise in at least residential property values that we've seen recently may not be reflected, at least fully in here, because they're set back a year. Is that about right?
That's correct. Fiscal 22 values are determined by sales in calendar year 20.
Yep. So our total property values were like, what is that, $1.75 billion?
That's correct.
And how does that compare to last year, increase or decrease, roughly? No idea.
Quite frankly, I don't know.
Okay, no problem. So I guess the point I want to make to the public is you're telling us that if we vote to keep the tax rate, the split the same, tax rate will drop to 15.18, and last year it was
$16.
But I think the message we need to make to people is that does not mean your taxes are going down, as you said when you compared all of ours, right? Because essentially at the end of the day, what we're doing here, it's a whole bunch of math around how to split up the total amount of tax levy that we're going to raise as a town. So our tax rate may go down, but our property values have gone up, and so in theory it all kind of nets out. And I think the one difference I think you tell us is that it could be that, let's say, residential properties might increase in value faster, let's say, than commercial properties, just as an example.
I would say that's true.
Which means that residents will pay a slightly greater share of the total tax burden.
Yes.
Than they would have the year before. Is that roughly how it works? Okay. Well, I really don't have any more questions. This is really sort of just trying to explain the process a little bit to the town. So, once again, thank you guys. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Dave.
Mr. Chairman.
Wendy?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We have a very similar conversation year to year with regard to the single tax rate. Will this information be available online anywhere? On the website or?
Do we post this on the website?
No, we've never posted that particular information because there's, as with our property record cards, there's a lot of information that you can get online, which is only part of the total picture. And I've found out through the years that people tend to misinterpret things, so we have not put it online. I suppose we could put that particular sheet online.
I just think one important thing to point out is that the Department of Revenue has approved the growth as of, 65 minutes ago. So I think that's important for the town to know. It's not arbitrary. It has been approved by the Commonwealth through the Department of Revenue.
Yeah. You know, the Department of Revenue may actually post this information on their website per the town. So there's a code that you can enter in the DOR state website, mass.gov, that will give you all this information, but it's through the state website versus our local website.
I know that we're always trying to be as transparent as possible.
Right.
So I guess that makes it incumbent upon us to explain or ask any questions necessary to do so. And just to echo Dave's point, just because the tax rate is going down, taxpayers should not anticipate a reduction in their taxes. I have no opposition to the single tax rate, and I appreciate you both coming up here and giving us a good explanation. So that's all, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Wendy. Jonathan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you for coming in tonight. I just have a couple quick questions. I think Dave and Wendy covered most of the questions I have, but I just am curious as around the percent share per class. It's at 86.2% right now. Do you know how much, for residential? Do you know how much that's shifted over the last year or two? Do you recall?
No, I don't have that figure with me.
You know, I can produce the last 5 years just to give you folks some perspective. I think the numbers have changed slightly, not enormously, but they have changed, and I can get you all those numbers next meeting. Sorry about that.
Thank you. And then just the other clarification I just want people to understand, I think you did mention this, is that the 2.5% levy increase was agreed upon at town meeting.
That's correct.
Is that correct?
Yeah.
Yep. So I just wanted clarification on that
Yeah.
for people. And that's really all I had. I think everything's been pretty much covered. Thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan. Jeff?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Nick and Ray, thank you for coming in. I'm fully in agreement with the one tax rate. And my comments are kind of similar to what they were last year and the year before, in that the example that we have of a $400,000 commercial building going up by $3,000, if is really kind of misleading when we talk about a building like a Prime Metals or something, which would go up significantly more than that, and I would think would provide a great disincentive for any businesses of that size to want to locate here in town. Would you agree with that?
Well, when I make up these sheets, or we make up these sheets, you've got to have something to compare apples to apples. That's why we've had the same value, but we could include different things, and obviously Prime Metals is probably in the order of 5 times this value, at least 5 times this value.
Mm-hmm.
And so that would be a huge increase in their tax bill.
Right, yeah. And I think that just when you talk about 86%, I think the demographics here, which have been relatively stable over the years, it just kind of precludes any kind of significant or material meaningful reduction in the residential rate. The math just is so lopsided to have an offsetting commercial increase would be just so great that we really couldn't attract any commercial business here of any size. So that's why I'm in favor of it. I think, in terms of, I think what we've all explained is the tax rate being at 15, 18 doesn't mean that the taxes are going down. And I think in terms of the greatest impact that we can have really on individual taxes is to really kind of target those debt exclusions as we've talked about in the past. So I'm very comfortable with what we have here. So thanks.
Thank you, Jeff. All right. I would like to stress one thing, because municipal government is kind of hard, and for the layperson who's just kind of zooming in, there's a lot of moving pieces that they were never exposed to. And one of the points that I would like to highlight is something that Nick mentioned early in his presentation, that ultimately the valuation of everyone's property is based on sales of similar houses. Every now and then you'll see something on social media, oh, the town is doing this, or the town is doing that. And in terms of your property taxes, no, it's not really the town that sets the rate. It's your neighbor who decides to move out of town, and it's the new neighbor that's paying the increased price. So ultimately, that's the way the system operates. So I just want residents to keep that in mind. If you get a little frustrated at the fact that your property taxes are going up, again, it's the market. And to Nick's point, this fiscal tax year's numbers are based on sales that happened 2020. Is that correct?
Yes.
So, this past year, there was even a greater spike. So I think that kind of bodes that this is going to be a trend, at least until the bubble bursts, so to speak, as it has a tendency to do. Nick, if you could, on that point, what would happen in that instance to tax rates if there was to be a bursting of the real estate market? Would that see the reverse happen?
We had that fairly recently, a couple of years ago, that sales were down and the values were down, and that's why the tax rate went up substantially too, because it was, I don't know how many years ago, 5 years ago, but perhaps it was around $12 a thousand.
Yeah, and of course, the overall valuation is determined by the state. So the individual parcel value is determined by real estate sales. So there's really little that we do I know there are things that occur in terms of setting the individual valuations, and that's the reason why your office is so critical. But overall, in the grand scheme of things, the big numbers are kind of out of our control. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah. So I hope that if anyone tunes in and watches this meeting, just remember that if your tax bill goes up, it's not us trying to take more money out of your pockets. It's just we get numbers that we have to work with, and there's calculations that are established under state law, and that's just the way the system operates. But at the end of the day, because the increase was not overall significant, that there hopefully will be brighter days ahead, particularly when some of the larger businesses that are in the process of going through come online, and they'll be able to offset a little bit. Although I suppose on that, when those sites go up, that's going to actually increase the overall value of the town. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, so then that's going to be something that we're going to have to deal with down the road.
And one other thing too, keep in mind that in spite of the tax rate, we are only raising $550,000 for our budget.
Right.
That's excluding new growth, but that's 2.5%. We give the school department $400,000 a year. I mean, that's it. And then we've got to figure out, new growth and some other funding mechanisms to account for that. State aid is stuck at $50,000 a year. My guess is even after this great year, it'll be $50,000. It's really a bigger burden on the taxpayers, and we're not getting any help from the state or federal government as far as recurring revenue. So that's important to keep in mind because it puts greater pressure on residential taxpayers. If you count healthcare, normally goes up 8%. That's what's in our budget forecast. That's $150,000 a year. With education, that's the 2.5%. Then what are you going to do with raises, with everything else that we have to pay for? So
roads, capital items, machinery replacement, repair, yeah.
Yeah,
It-
insurance, just insurance alone, property casualty, everything, so.
And yet, throughout the ups and downs over your tenure here, we've been able to maintain the services. We haven't had to shut down any departments. The schools have remained open, police department, the library, the senior center, the town beach. So I'm hoping that the residents who actually do tune in understand that we are doing our best to maintain the services, and we're just playing with the numbers that we have presented in front of us. I do have one other thing that I wrote down, and Jim, it was to your point to Jonathan, in terms of the year-to-year comparison. And actually, maybe this would go to Debbie, and I don't want to have to give Debbie extra work, but maybe, next year or the year, going forward, you give us,
Historical.
the historical,
Not
just
a
so we could
problem.
have, something to compare.
Yep.
All right, excellent.
That-
Well,
Mike, well, that would be coming from us, because Jim is going to pass the buck.
No, I've been collecting these over the years, and I can do it myself, but yes, it does come from you initially.
and I'm sure if we really wanted to, we could go through our email and find last year's presentation as well, but.
Yes, you could. But what numbers would you like to see? And I think Jonathan asked about the residential, the change in the percentage of the residential and the commercial, and we can do that easily.
I think the biggest thing would just be the overall valuations of year to year. So that way we can kind of understand, the rise, the impact. Nothing
value,
big.
Total value per class.
total
The second
value,
page
yeah.
top is what I think we'll look at.
Yeah, pretty much your bracket. If we could see this for this fiscal year and that for last year, we can actually see with our own eyes the increase.
We can do that.
Oh, well, thank you. I'd appreciate that.
And you won't have to wait till next year.
Oh,
One thing that I do have to tell you before you vote is that in the process of the calculation of the tax rate, you can't have pennies, so there's always a little change left over, and we have to inform you what that amount is, and that's called the excess levy capacity, because we can't get half cents. And that amount this year would be about $6,742.96.
okay. And for the sake of transparency, where does that fall into the budget?
That means that we cannot raise that.
Oh, okay. All right.
If
It's a rounding down. Okay.
That's right. If we didn't round the tax rate to the nearest cent, we could collect that.
Yeah, I think the days of half pence are long gone.
We haven't figured out a way to do that.
Yeah.
And we don't want to.
Exactly. All right. Well, I'm with my colleagues. Have always been a fan of the equal tax rate. I think it's just. I think it's fair. After all, the businesses that set up shop here, they contribute to the overall well-being of the town, just like the residents do. So, I think that's not going to be an issue. Do you have any other comments before I open it up for a vote? Or?
The only other thing is that Sutton is kind of unique in that none of the towns around us have water districts that raise funds to operate partially their systems by a tax rate. And so we prepare 3 separate tax rate forms and all the different things for that. And the other 2 districts have yet to be completed. Probably be completed tomorrow. So your board will have to sign electronically what you're going to vote on, and that probably can't happen for another couple days. So
Okay.
we'll tell Jim, and Jim will get a hold of you.
All right, we still have the software capability. Yeah. All right. Not a problem. Thank you for that update. I appreciate that.
And those rates for the water districts are not things we vote on?
No, the water district is like a little town in Sutton. It's totally separate, but the Board of Assessors has values for them, does all the calculations for them.
Got it. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right. Before we close the public hearing, does anyone else have any other questions or comments for Nick or Ray? All right, then why don't we close the public hearing?
Mr. Chair, if I could make a motion to close the public hearing?
Second.
Hearing a motion and second. Why don't we do a roll?
David Hall, aye.
Wendy Mead, aye.
Jonathan Anderson, aye.
Jeff Bannon, aye.
Jesse Lemanik, aye.
Seeing that we're moving forward, I would like to make a motion to approve a single tax factor for fiscal year 2022.
Second.
Hearing a motion and second. Any other comments, questions, concerns? Why don't we do a roll?
David Hall, aye.
Wendy Mead, aye.
Jonathan Anderson, aye.
Jeff Bannon, aye.
And Jesse Lemanik, aye. Gentlemen, thank you for the hard work that you do every single year, and thank you for your presentation.
The thank you should go to Joyce, because Joyce does 99% of this.
We know that all too well. Give her our regards. All right. Next on the agenda, we have the 2022 license renewals. Jim?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, as the chairman stated, the 22 license renewals are up for consideration. We do this every year. A few items I'd like to point out to the board before we get into it. The first is Brown Automotive chose not to renew his license. I think it was a class two used car license, and he's essentially retiring. And it's a locale. It's a residence, so it's not a license out on 146. So that one just disappears. Love to Play in Car Auto came before this board earlier this year, and the board voted to continue their license throughout 2022. So those aren't in this as well. Blackstone National Golf Course had some issues. Would like to push that one off until the next meeting, December 21st, to give them a chance to get caught up. They're not major issues, but they are, issues that the building commissioner would like resolved. And we're fairly confident that they will be able to resolve them. The barn itself has a temporary occupancy permit, and John gave that as part of a wedding that took place over the summer, and they wanted to, the plans had already been made, and he agreed to issue a temporary occupancy permit. But they won't be able to serve alcohol in that facility until they obtain a full occupancy permit for that facility. So just to let the board know what is going on over there. Also, Red Roof Inn passed all their inspections. The board met with them a couple times last year and raised some concerns, and those, I think some of those concerns have been addressed. Certainly the code issues have all been addressed. The building commissioner, the fire chief, and the Board of Health director, Cheryl Winsky, all did the tour. Dennis reviewed it and signed off on it. We were talking about it this morning at department head meeting, and he said that, there's a lot fewer calls to that location than they were 6 months ago to a year ago. So that's good. There's some progress there, and, it doesn't change our focus on that facility, but we are allowing them to operate, and as long as they keep all the code issues resolved and they provide a healthy, affordable living place, that's great. But we want it to be clean and healthy. So that's good. They certainly heard the board's direction and instructions, and I feel comfortable recommending Red Roof Inn get a license for the next calendar year. And that's all I have, and Jonathan has the list of license renewals.
All right, very good. Thank you for those updates, Jim. You get the heavy lifting, my friend, so why don't you take it away?
All right, the following license have been renewed for 2022. Class 1, Rock and Recycling. Class 2, Beck's, Brian's Auto Service, Frank's Auto Service, Hampton Motor Sales, Byrider, Lappin's Auto, PT Watts, Inc., Progressive Auto, Vinnie's Automotive, Sutton Auto LLC, 122 Worcester Providence Turnpike LLC, aka John's Automotive. Catering license, 3D's Catering. Innkeeper's license, Red Roof Inn. Lodging house, Putnam Hill Bed and Breakfast. Common vicular, Brickstone Kitchen, Crossroads Variety, Dudley Jenner and American Legion Post number 414, Dunkin' Donuts inside Extra Mart, Five Guys Hamburgers, Jim's Pizza, King's Campground Country Store, KP's Breakfast and Lunch, Market 32, Starbucks inside of Market 32, Nick's Country Market, Peking Garden, Pizzeria Bruno, PV Food and Beverage, Schultz's Place, Starbucks Corporation, Sutton Center Country Store, Sutton Falls Camping Area, Sutton Extra Mart locations at 27 and 157 Worcester Providence Turnpike, Tony's Sutton Pizza, Amusement Devices, Sutton Falls Campground, Dunley Gentleman American Post number 414, Jukebox, Alcohol Liquor License Restaurants, Brickstone Kitchen, Dudley Gentleman American Legion Post number 414, PV Food and Beverage, Tony's Pizza, Wine and Malt Liquor License Restaurant, Pizzeria Bruno, Alcohol Liquor License Package Stores, Crossroads Variety, Market 32, Wine and Malt Beverage Liquor License Retail, King's Campground, Nick's Country Market, Sutton Center Country Store, Valancourt Folk Art, Music and Dance, Dudley Jenner American Legion Post number 414, PV Food and Beverage, and Entertainment by DJ Seasonal, King's Campground.
All right, thank you, Jonathan. Why don't we open it up for any comments or questions? Dave?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a couple of really quick ones. First of all, thank you to Jonathan for reading all that. Secondly, I guess I'm surprised that you need a license to operate a jukebox, but so be it.
State of Massachusetts rules.
Right, there you go. Just a general comment. A few years back, this seemed like a problem with people getting all of their registrations in on time, and that was a real focus for the board back at that point, and trying to urge people to do that. And it seems like that problem has more or less gone by the board. So I'm grateful to the business community for sort of handling that.
Well, and certainly the board's, insistence on everything be delivered on time has helped us a lot.
So, but that's it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Wendy?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a couple of quick questions. When there's a change in management at one of these organizations, they generally come to us for approval of the change of management. If there is a sale of one of these items that's approved tonight, is there a distinction when they sell that business with regard to business value and liquor license value? Or is that liquor license not necessarily transferred over with the sale of the property? Does that make sense? It's a little convoluted. I guess at the bottom line is, do we have a set number of liquor, malt, or wine licenses in the town?
We do.
How do we reach a value, or does the town reach any value? That's entirely up to the purchasers?
There is no value per se assessed for those licenses. However, the latest exchange, I think, was Market 32 with Vinnie Allard's liquor store on the other side of the 146. And they entered into a private agreement, and Vinnie sold his license to Market 32, and we were kind of out of the picture. So that's the only example I can give you. And I have no idea what the cost or what Market 32 paid for that license.
If I may, he didn't technically do that, though, right? That technically what he did is he got paid to give up his license,
That's
which
right.
made it available
Right.
for us to. I mean, we didn't actually have to grant it to Market 32 if we had some reason not to, but.
Right, you're right about
So
that.
that leads to what I was just going to say. So if ABC Corp sells the business to XYZ, XYZ still has to come before us for approval of their acceptance of the license.
Yes.
Well, theoretically, I would think ABC still holds the license unless they want to give it up, in that example,
That's
generally
right.
speaking. Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
Okay, I just wanted to clarify that in case there was any questions.
Yeah, I mean, you folks as the local licensing authority have total control over liquor licenses, and this process is part of that whole situation where on an annual basis, people need to pass an inspection, everything needs, and it's really, we have every once in a while random,
Stings.
not stings, they're
Compliance checks.
I was thinking the same
compliance
thing.
checks, thank you. Compliance checks, just to make sure everybody is up and up, and ultimately, if they're not, then they come before the board and they deal with whatever the board has to say, so,
Okay.
yeah.
That was my only question, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
It's a good question. Thank you, Wendy. Jonathan?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The only question or concern I have is around with the Red Roof Inn and our discussions that we had last spring. And I understand that all of the, the building office's concerns have been addressed, and as well as the number of calls the police department receives. And so what I'm kind of curious about is that after the license is approved, if things start to change with the number of calls, and I know you'll keep us abreast of that, but sometimes they have a tendency to clean things up because they're under microscope, and I'm just a little bit, just keeping my eye out on that.
Yeah, it's fair to do that. The reality is, we go down and we pay attention to what happens down there. And if there is any hiccup or something goes in the wrong direction, then we will bring it to the board's attention, in spite of the fact that they will have to pass an inspection 10 months from now.
Right.
So, that one gets a little extra attention because of their past incidences
Yep.
with the town. But it's good to pay attention to that.
Yeah, it's just a concern because I was just left kind of really surprised, last time, and and I just didn't think the transparency was there on their part, and so I just want to keep an eye on that myself. So that's all I have. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Jonathan. Jeff?
I had really just two questions when I looked at this. One was the questions regarding the Red Roof Inn, which you explained, and I'm glad that that's still being looked at, and that the issues were resolved. The other one was just with those compliance checks. I'm assuming that there weren't any issues because no one has come before the board to say that they have been.
Yeah, to be honest, I don't know when the last compliance checks. I know Millbury just had a compliance checks because the offenders, people that didn't follow the rules, were before the select board in Millbury. Part of it might be a little COVID related, that it's difficult to find people to do these inspections, and I don't know the state's position on this. So I'll get some additional information on that, because I think it's helpful to do this just on a regular basis,
Agree.
Just to keep everybody honest. And I haven't heard anything from the chief as far as the latest one, so I'll double check.
And those violations, if any, would come before the board.
They would.
Yeah, good. So, questions, comments?
Great, thank you, Jeff. To your last question, in my time on the board, we've had multiple entities that we license come before us. There was the compliance check with alcohol sales. We had the issue, remember the used car dealerships? We're not putting the proper sticker on there.
The lemon law.
Yeah, red roof. So we definitely have the authority, if we hear of a violation, to call, the entity in before us, and we have the right to make judgment on them. So I think if we do get word, I think we'll be very proactive, and I'm
And
sure.
I'll mention it to Dennis, because something tells me we haven't done it in a while, so.
Yeah, I think the last time we did it that was a few years ago.
Yeah, it was a while ago.
Yeah, it
Certainly
might be a good
pre-COVID.
thing. Might be a good thing. The other thing that I'd like to mention is just for full disclosure. Obviously, as many people in the community know, I am the commander of the Sons of the American Legion down at the Dudley General. But the Sons as an entity and organization is a charitable organization. We have no authority, control, or say over the business side of the Dudley General Post. That is controlled by the Legion alone, and I am not a member of the American Legion. So I probably should have filed an ethics sheet in advance, and I will do so with Laura as soon as possible. But I feel confident, and just for the sake of transparency, that because I have no control over any of the finances impact of these licenses, that I don't think my vote is an ethical violation. At least I would
I don't
hope
think
not.
you need to recuse yourself.
All right. That being said, then why don't we move forward with a motion to approve these licenses? Jonathan, if you would.
Mr. Chairman, I make a motion to approve as read the 2022 license renewals in the town of Sutton.
Second.
All right, hearing a motion and second. Any other comments, questions, concerns? Then why don't we do a roll call vote?
David Hall, aye.
Wendy Mead, aye.
Jonathan Anderson, aye.
Jeff Bannon, aye.
And Jesse Lemanik, aye. Thank you very much. All right, next up, we have a planning board appointment of one William Telcott.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. With the transition of Kyle Bergeson going over to zoning board, it's left a vacancy on the planning board, and the planning board is recommending they promote, if you will, Bill Talcott to a full member from an associate member. Bill has been a former planning board member back years ago, and is excited to fill that role, and I think the planning board is excited to have him in that role. That does, I think, leave an associate position open on that board, and we will post for that. It's a sign of how significant those associate positions are, that they are trained and they understand the lingo. Bill has been involved with the planning board as an associate member for a number of years, as well as prior serving on that board. So it's a smooth transition when we have board vacancies.
All right, excellent, very good.
And he was here before the board.
This was
I guess a couple years ago.
2 or 3 years ago,
yeah.
Actually, if I remember correctly, when he came, he had the possibility of being a full-time member, and he actually opted at that point to be an associate member.
Yeah, and the current chair, Bill, Mike Gagan
Mike.
is the current,
Yeah.
is the one he deferred to.
Correct. All right, comments, Dave?
No, not really. As we always say, just appreciate the effort that people put in. And, again, I think the feeder system, as Jim just said, has worked out great, even though Bill, because of his prior experience, might not be the best example of that. But nonetheless, great to have him. Thank you.
Thank you. Wendy?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just, again, I think it'll be a pretty smooth transition. Bill has a lot of history with the planning board, and it will be interested to see, how he settles in, and I have no anticipation of any issues. So thank you so much.
Wonderful, thank you. Jonathan?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. No, I'd just like to thank Bill for his service and coming back to take on this role. I think just want to reiterate, Jim's discussion around the associate positions and how important they are, especially on a board like the Planning Board or Conservation Commission. It does a pretty technical boards, and it takes a little bit of time. And being on there and being part of the process is really important. And I know on the planning board that, Jen definitely does take their input. So it's definitely a great learning experience. I really highly recommend people take up the, volunteer for those positions. And then you really learn it when you become chair. Right off of being an associate. So that's all I have.
All right, thank you, Jonathan. Jeff?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to Mr. Talcott also for agreeing to step up. And I think his experience and perspective, I think, just in the next year or two going forward, it's timely, I think, because I think there's some pretty big development issues coming up. So I think that'll be valuable. So thank you to him for stepping up.
All right, thank you. Not meaning to sound like a parrot, but I agree with everything my colleague said. Bill, thank you for stepping up. This is going to be wonderful, and it's going to be a smooth transition, that's for sure. I do have one question, and that would be for you. And this is something I probably should know, but it's just eluding me at the moment. Do we have a set number of associate positions for those boards that allow that? Two per board.
Yeah, and that was done with the charter review that
Right.
Recently happened, maybe 5 years ago.
Yeah, I remember that this opened up the opportunity, but I couldn't remember if we
And
had a
it's
set
just
number.
been such a great situation to be able to just pull people up that have been in training,
Yeah.
as Jonathan mentioned. So
Yeah, being able to see it, be able to participate, there's huge value to that. So. Other than that, I have no other questions or issues, so thank you again.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make a motion to approve the appointment of William Talcott from Associate Planning Board Member to full voting member with a term to expire June 30th, 2023.
Again?
2023. 2?
3.
3.
3.
I'm looking at the wrong motion. I apologize.
Second. You get a second already?
Yeah, second.
Sorry. It's like,
All right, hearing a motion and second. Why don't we do a roll call vote?
David Hall, aye.
Wendy Mead, aye.
Jonathan Anderson, aye.
Jeff Bannon, aye.
Jesse Lemanik, aye. That shows me right, kind of consolidating my stack, so. All right, next up, we have North Brookfield Renewal. We're going to have a public health nursing MIA, which Jim is going to give us an update on.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is one of a number of IMAs that we currently have. North Brookfield has asked for a one-year renewal. In the past, we have a contract that lays out automatic renewal year after year, and most communities choose that option. They don't want to get involved with it. They've had a change in management in North Brookfield, and an attorney now is running the town, and as attorneys do, they're very thorough, and so they've asked us to renew this license, which is essentially the exact same license, but we've changed the dates. The one change here is, rather than going a year, which was North Brookfield's request, Cheryl Wawinski wanted to go 6 months. So at the end of June, this may be before the board again, or maybe not, because Cheryl's in the process of trying to cut down the IMAs that she currently has. You'll see later in my update that the town of Millville and the town of Sutton no longer work under the IMA by mutual agreement. So the process has started, and she's slowly starting to get rid of some of these communities because it's really a burden on her. She could be retiring in hopefully not soon, but in the near future. And this would alleviate some of her burden, all of these IMAs, especially having gone through just the COVID situation over the last year and a half or so. So this is for a 6-month renewal with North Brookfield, and we'll take it from there.
All right, thank you.
Sure.
Dave?
Thank you. Not really too many comments. I think when I first saw this agenda item and saw that it was a 6-month extension rather than a year, and specifically because we wanted to put some thoughts around how much burden to continue to carry, I was, I think, appreciative of that because, as we all know here, as we were signing these IMAs along the way, we kept asking the question of whether we were able to keep up, whether there was enough or too much burden for Cheryl. And in normal times, it didn't seem too bad. But I think, the stresses of COVID have proven that there's a lot of them out there. So I'm glad that we're sort of stepping back a little bit and putting some thoughts into where we may step back a little bit. So in the meantime, if Cheryl's comfortable moving this out 6 months, I'm happy to support that. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Wendy?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm sure what I'll hear all my colleagues say with both this motion and the Millville one is, just recognizing what Cheryl and Judy have been doing for the last couple of years. And, I recall the conversations, are we sure it's going to be okay with Cheryl? Are we sure she can handle it? And pre-COVID, she certainly had a good clamp down on all of them. But I'm glad to see that, she's taking a step back. And like I said, I'm sure we'll hear about it with Millville too, but just my appreciation to Cheryl and Judy for all that they've done. And I have no problem with approving this for 6 months. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Jonathan?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think from my perspective, I would really, I know we're trying to pare these down. And how many IMAs do we have right now?
I don't count Millville, so around 11.
11. And so, I'm leaning more towards the 6 months is just being kind of a notice period. I really think in the 6 months we should sever this agreement because one of the things I'm concerned about is the number of hours that Cheryl does work. I see her in here all the time, and I'm venturing to guess she's here on the weekends as well. And I don't see the situation we're in ending anytime soon. So I just don't think it's sustainable that we continue managing all these IMAs. Like at a certain point in time in the past, I think it made sense. But now, like just after seeing what Cheryl had to go through over the last 18 months to 2 years, and which was beyond what I think we should expect of anybody, but she did it because that's who she is. But I don't think that's sustainable or even healthy for someone to be doing that long term. And so, that's just my concern, and I really think that we should be working very aggressively without leaving towns in the lurch, but really, as these agreements come up, that we really take a hard look at this and really get her working time at least back down to like a normal time frame, so that, obviously there's going to be extra time she needs to put in, but I don't want the current situation, I'm making an assumption there that she is working many, many hours. Has it changed, or is she still working?
Yeah, it's changed significantly, and your point is well taken. Don't get me wrong, because I've been working just as aggressively trying to weed out some of these IMAs because the world has changed significantly pre-COVID and post-COVID. So yes, we are looking to cut these down and ease up on it. The state has announced this new contact tracing element, and they've created these regions. And a number of all these towns now have a nurse that's going to do it's hard for me to say contact tracing because I usually contract, but it's contact tracing. And a number of regions have been set up. So Cheryl's busy trying to get these towns in certain regions, so it takes less burden off of her. Part of the challenge with COVID is all the contact tracing that she's had to do. Mm-hmm. And it's a tremendous amount of work. Taking all of the positives off of Maven, which is the program that the state uses, and assign those cases. And that's like 15, 20 minutes per case. That's the majority of the work that she's been doing in her office, nights and weekends. But with the state investing in these regions, that burden has been lifted from her. So she's able to take time off, enjoy weekends a little bit. And I'm not saying she's living the high life right now, but she is planning on going away a little bit of a break. But part of this is also looking at the IMAs. Mm-hmm. In the past, it was flu clinics and a little bit of Maven work or communicable diseases. That's totally changed under COVID, and we're working to minimize that.
Yeah, because when I read through the contract, it's pretty extensive what she has to do for at least for North Brookfield. I'm assuming it's pretty similar.
Yeah, these are standard contracts, yeah. And I know the contract is broad. The amount of work used to be limited to flu clinics, and if there was any communicable disease in the community, she would have to track that. Right.
Yes. So it does sound like her time is coming. That's my main concern, is that we just get her back down to something that's close to normal. And obviously, it's never going to be 100%. But I just think that just any employee or anybody working, like eventually, I don't want the norm to become the hours that she's. I know you're not doing that. I know you're managing it, but it's just. I'm just watching this last 18 months to 2 years, and what she's done, to manage it is amazing. But I don't want her to burn out.
Fair enough.
All right. Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you,
Mr. Chair.
Jeff?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have the same issues when I looked at this that Jonathan just brought up. It says, just looking at the contract, it says, that's, whereas the town of Sutton public health nurse has the requisite skills, experience, and ability, that's fine, but does she have the time to do this? And I understand that this is some of this language is boilerplate, but it's extensive responsibilities, and this is just one town. And I didn't see anything in here for any minimum number of hours or maximum number of hours, and multiply it times 11, and how much do we really make off of this?
I I mean.
Like, what's the benefit to the town?
COVID is a totally different situation, but pre-COVID, vaccine clinics,
65 an hour
75 an hour,
was the COVID.
right, but
I think some of the IMAs were 65.
But what do we have in the health insurance funds that are not town-related from these IMAs? Do you recall? Because we generally transfer money out of these funds at year-end and,
Right, well, pre-COVID, we were probably netting 10,000 a year. After
Per agreement or?
No, total.
Oh,
After paying their salaries and any other, part-time nurse salaries to help out.
we would get flu shot reimbursement from the state.
Yeah, we do a flu shot. So, yeah,
was-
we're, I mean, it wasn't big money makers, no, but, back in the day, we were looking for any kind of revenue source to help with the
Right.
budget. Looking forward, yeah, we've got some great commercial tax opportunities coming up, and, maybe we don't need to do some of that that kind of work.
yeah.
And as Jim said, or Jonathan, I think of which, Cheryl's tired. COVID did a number, she's tired. I've been supporting her right along for the last 6 months, to start giving up these IMAs. We're gonna lose her because of the burnout, and we don't wanna do that. So I'm totally in support of letting her wind down a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I just don't know that the town clearly doesn't get a major benefit. If it's 10,000, we probably, I don't know what we spend on lawyers to look at these things and all those kind of things. So it's not a great benefit overall to the town of Sutton. So.
It was in the day.
Yeah, I understand that, yeah.
But, times have changed.
Right, and you see her here every night, and you see her here on weekends, so. So those are the concerns I had, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Yeah, and on your last point, in proportion to what was done, because I'm glad you mentioned that the flu clinics, because I remember when we got up to like number 10, number 11, number 12, we kept asking the question, are we overburdening? And she'd be like, no, it's just a flu clinic, maybe a season, nothing big, because she has a big heart. She wants to help. But yeah, in light of the reality of the situation. Actually, it wouldn't surprise me if many municipalities do whatever they can to get their own town nurses, because I think there's definitely a clear value in that position.
And I think the pandemic kind of made these communities realize the benefit of having a town nurse. And for many years, town nurses were a disappearing thing in municipalities, and now they realize how valuable they are. And because Cheryl would serve in 25 communities if she was willing to do it and the board was willing to support that. So.
And also think about the scale and the scope of the work that she did during the COVID. She ran vaccination clinics, she ran testing, and she did all the number crunching for every single town that we were associated with. So, yeah, I mean, there's definitely, I think it's something that's going to be reconsidered by many municipalities, and I think we're just lucky that we had her and we had the position in place. So. Let's do all we can. I'm inclined to agree with you, Tim. It's small potatoes that we can. Let's save her to serve our needs. So it's definitely.
Mr. Chairman, if I just can ask one more question, I assume
absolutely.
the reason that we are extending this at this point at all is just really to not leave the town of North Brookfield kind of high and dry at this point.
Yeah, at this point, there's not a negative relationship with North Brookfield, but it does give them a 6-month notice that.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that's definite, but that's the way we're leaning right now. And
Just cut it off now, just sort of leave it.
yeah, it's kind of abrupt, and they don't have any other options. They got to find a town nurse to serve them, or go with Harrington Hospital or some other agency that charges twice the rate that the town of Sutton charges them. So it's a lot more expensive.
Got it. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Mr. Chair, may I ask another question?
Sure, absolutely.
Just a question. So are most of the towns that she serves, of the 11, are most of them kind of like the size of Sutton, there and abouts, or are there larger towns that?
They're mostly our size. I mean, there are some larger ones. Webster was our first IMA back, 10, 12 years ago. And you know, since then, we've been adding IMAs for smaller communities, Millville, the Brookfields, North Brookfield, Brookfield itself. I think there's another East Brookfield. There's another Brookfield in there. So, you know, they are relatively small, but she still has Millbury. That's a relatively large community. West Boylston. But you'll see some changes in these over time, you know, within the next year or so.
Yeah, and I'm wondering if we like look at the larger towns first, because obviously there's a larger population, potentially for more, you know.
Yeah, at the same time, you know, many of these larger towns have other resources, and the contact tracing isn't an issue with them, and it's just providing vaccines, and there's very little time spent on them if she doesn't have to download everything off of Maven and do all that. So we'll you know, we have the same goal of
Yeah.
how we get there. We'll figure that out.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think overall, I think my concern is as well is that when someone is at that level of they can burn out, but then there's also the potential for mistakes to be made or, you know, things to happen, and that's just a concern. Again, it's probably less so than it was during, you know, that risk because, you know, being burned out. I mean, I think it's eased off a little bit, but I just think overall, when you keep someone at that level for that long, the likelihood of a mistake or something happening just increases. So it's just, I think there's just lots of reasons that I think at one point, to your point, this made absolute sense. But I think, you know, I think we're in a new world, and I think it's just we're going to have to adjust to that. So, all right, thank you.
Thank you. Jeff?
Just had one quick question on how much would a town like North Brookfield pay for all these services to us?
You know, what would be easier for me is to compare a smaller community of Millville.
Right.
I don't know how many people they have in Millville, a couple thousand, 3,000 if they're lucky. And they had some bills, not huge bills, but a couple $1,000s that they owed to us. And, you know, the Brookfields as a group generally pay us more than that for their services. And so, you know, for them to go outside and get a private company to provide these services, their budget for this will go up. There's no doubt in my mind. Cheryl's very generous. She doesn't charge for transportation. She doesn't charge for anything. She just answers phone calls. She doesn't charge them for that. These private companies charge for as soon as they get in the car. And so they'll have a rude awakening, some of these communities that are no longer working with us. But, you know, it's in the best interest of the town of Sutton, and so we got to do what's right for us.
Yep. Okay.
Yeah, it's key exclamation point. It's our decision ultimately, and we want to do what's best by us and, of course, our employees. So.
Yeah.
All right, any other questions before I look for a motion? All right, then why don't we go forward with the motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move to approve an approximate 6-month extension for nursing services between the town of North Brookfield and the town of Sutton for the period of December 7th, 2021 to June 30th, 2022.
Second.
All right, hearing a motion and second. Last minute questions, concerns? All right, why don't we do a roll?
David Hall, aye.
Wendy Mead, aye.
Jonathan Anderson, aye.
Jeff Bannon, aye.
And Jesse Lemanik, aye. All right, next on the agenda is town manager update. Jim?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A few updates for the board. The first is the new library director. Shannon Duffy has been appointed as the new library director. She was the former youth librarian for the town. I think it's pretty much universal. She did a wonderful job in that role. So now her challenge is to sit at the department head table and see how she does there. And I'm just kidding. She attended her first department head meeting this morning and passed with flying colors. She did say that she just got a town email, and you know, she asked a question about, are we gonna do any kind of cyber awareness training? and the group pretty much gave her the business, which is good for a first department head meeting. So we wish her well and congratulate her in that role. Ambulance contract renewal, MedStar. The contract with MedStar is up next June, the June 22nd. And so we're 6 months out. It's pretty much universal between the tri-towns that they've done a great job for us in particular, but these other towns agree. They would like to continue. Their preliminary contract is the towns of Millbury and Grafton pay 0 because of the number of runs they have in those communities. Sutton has a lot fewer runs, medical runs, so we pick up the burden of it. So our cost has been $98,760. They've agreed to keep it that same rate for fiscal year 2023. And for years 2 through 5 of the contract, it'll be a 2% escalator. So it'll go up pennies, or a couple $1,000s a year. This is important because we do need an ambulance provider. And we went out to bid 5 years ago, 6 years ago or so, and MedStar was the most competitive one. We had the second lowest bidder was $350,000 to provide ambulance service to the town of Sutton. MedStar has worked great with us. We've got a great relationship. The employees are pretty much town employees, and we recognize them as such. The other alternative is if this doesn't work out, then we all 3 communities have to get a couple of ambulances, hire a full-time EMTs or basic paramedics or EMT intermediates. There's so many different decisions, and to hire a crew to run ambulances 24/7, you're talking about probably 2 ambulances, maybe 12, 14 employees. It's an administrative nightmare. If we have to do it and we're there, then we will do it. And Matt's up to that. But right now, I'd like to continue it, paying $100,000 a year. We get full ambulance coverage, good ambulance coverage for the town of Sutton. And so I look forward to continuing this agreement for the next 5 years. Millville intermunicipal agreement. We've mutually agreed to stop serving the town of Millville's Board of Health through their IMA. Millville was struggling to pay for their invoices, and Cheryl and I talked about it, and we mutually agreed to separate our ways. And as I mentioned earlier, Cheryl and I have been looking to reduce the amount of IMAs that we currently have, and we'll be before you shortly over the next 6 months to a year for our plan to reduce them. Police Department grant with Department of Public Health. This is something that's been in the works for some time now, but I figured I'd just give you a heads up. This is just a grant process that Dennis applied for to hire a social services person that is specialized in domestic violence. Many of the calls that come into the police department are not, typical police calls. They are just confusing, mental illness, domestic violence related. And the police could use some specialist in this area that understands what's going on, so it doesn't end up in a full confrontation with weapons or other issues. So Dennis is 100% behind this, as am I, and hopefully this grant comes out. We'll work with a couple of other communities and share this person. This person won't be a Town of Sutton employee, but they will be on call for the town of Sutton when we have a situation that may arise for their skills. COVID vaccine clinic for children ages 5 to 11 will be held at the Sutton Simonian Early Learning Center next Tuesday, 4 p.m. to 6:30 p.m. A parent or legal guardian must accompany the child, and the second dose is January 4th. We've had over 100 kids sign up for that, so it's a pretty good population, and that's part of our goal of getting more people vaccinated against this virus. And a new finance and warrant committee member is Brian Jamros. He has agreed to serve. He was on the FinCom many years ago when he was a kid out of college, but now he's got a lot more experience and wisdom after having served with Unibank and now Bartholomew Company, the company that we invest a lot of our funds with, OPEB fund included. And he is a town of Sutton resident, and I'm excited to have him on board. It does bring a new level of, we are hiring. We do have an actuary on the FinCom. We do have some other professionals in the finance industry being able to deal with this, and Brian is a great addition to this board. And just reminder on holiday hours, I think I went over that at the last meeting, and the Christmas party is December 21st, not 31st, 21st, 11:30 to 1 p.m.
All right, thank you.
Sure.
Dave, you have any questions or comments for Jim?
Certainly, thank you very much. Welcome to Shannon. Excited to have her on board, and it's great to hire from within. She already knows the place and knows what she's up for, so good for all of us. So looking forward to that. Jim, going to the ambulance contract renewal, I think you described it well, but you also left out the period of time when Grafton, for a short period of time, was going to renew on their own without bringing Millbury and Sutton into the mix, and that was going to raise our cost tremendously. So, not to rehash old history, but some negotiations kind of got the three of us back together, brought our costs way back down, and I think I guess what I would think is that the opportunity to be able to sort of stay with the status quo in this particular service feels like a really big help, but not having sort of consistency there feels like just some difficulty in transition. So I'd rather keep it that way if I can, keep it with the same people. And if you're telling us that the feedback that we're having for this crew is really good, then I'm happy to stay with that. I guess the only question that I had, it seems obvious from what you're saying, but this is not a thing that has to go out to bid.
No, it's not, it can, but it's not required.
Okay. We already talked about the Millville IMA, and I'm really excited to see this grant for the police department. We've all sort of learned through the last some period of time here that the demands that get placed on police departments is really significant, and I think this is an instance where you learn that they're forced into circumstances where they don't necessarily have the expertise. So for us to be able to have a grant to bring in somebody that does have greater expertise in an area that really, at least from the perspective of a non-policeman, seems like can create maybe as much stress on a police department or a police officer in the field as almost anything else they face. It's a really good thing to be able to do. So that's exciting. COVID vaccine clinic sounds great to me. Another example of, I assume, Cheryl doing an awful lot of work.
Yep.
And I guess this is the night for people returning to committees, but it's good to have Brian back. It's good to have some expertise, some additional expertise on the finance committee. I know for what seems like decades, getting qualified help on that committee. Sorry.
Present company excluded.
Just kidding, of course. I'm happy to have those people. And thanks to Sue for the work that she did. So, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Dave. Wendy?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Again, thank you to Shannon. We were very fortunate the period of time that lapsed, before she was hired was relatively short, so that's fantastic.
And she was acting director shortly after Betsy left, and there was no transition that we needed to make.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. I thought the analogy you made was very spot on about what the cost would be to the town of Sutton to purchase ambulances, to have a round-the-clock crew. We talked about taxes tonight. Taxes would have to cover that. So, I thought that analogy was great, and I fully support the contract. And on a personal level, they've helped my family on numerous occasions, and they've always been wonderfully professional and responsive. The IMA for Millville, are we ceasing this agreement in the midst of the contract, or is the contract expired?
No, it is, they were, the contract hasn't expired. So it was still mid-contract, and due to some payment issues, we decided to end the contract. And Millville agreed.
Do we need to put that in writing so it isn't a breach of the contract? I mean, how is the best way to address that?
Millville's already addressed us,
Okay.
asking to be released, and
Fantastic. You know, as you mentioned before, it's that lawyer thing. So.
yeah, I hear you.
Really excited that Dennis has applied for the grant. I think it really addresses a lot of national concerns that have been raised about the need for health care, mental health care workers. You know, talking to Dennis, he was telling me, you know, the increase in domestic violence calls during COVID, you know, for obvious reasons, just completely spiked. So I'm glad they're addressing that. I guess my one question is, in the practical application, how does this work? Does this mental health care worker accompany police officers on calls? Is he or she available by radio communication? I mean, do we know that yet, how it would play
I
out?
don't know that. I mean, you know, Dennis and I have talked about it on a higher level, you know, discussing the grant process and approving that whole situation. But Dennis can probably talk the nuts and bolts of it, of, you know, how they would be able to reach that person. Maybe some nights they would go in the cruises with the department, but it's a shared position between a number of,
Right.
so those logistics need to be worked out.
Okay.
Yeah,
I look forward to hearing a little bit
Yeah.
more about that. I
if we get the
support
grant
it. I'm just
and we
curious.
find someone willing to serve in that role, you know, those are two big thresholds. But if and when we get that, then Dennis will be before you to address all those issues.
Okay, that'd be great. I look forward to that. Very excited about the numbers for the COVID vaccines for the kids. I'm overjoyed to see that. So, and I hope those numbers increase. Again, sort of the breach of contract issue. Is there a conflict for Brian to be on the board when he's also working on the town's investments?
He's filed at 268 with
Okay,
the town clerk, and so it's out there. Everybody knows.
Fantastic.
He will abstain from certain issues regarding OPEB discussion, but I do think he's a valuable source to be able to address our actuary when they do come in January, to ask them some challenging questions on behalf of the town and behalf of the committee. So.
Yeah, no, I think that's fantastic, and we all know we want our bond rating to increase for a variety of reasons, so. That's all I have for tonight, Mr. Chair, thank you.
All right, thank you, Wendy. Jonathan?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you, Jim, for your update.
Sure.
Yeah, I would just like to congratulate Shannon and, you know, taking over this position. And I think it's really great for the town because there's a real continuity there. She's familiar with the position. She's been in the interim role, and she's also, you know, been the youth librarian. So I think it's a great hire, and I'm excited about that. As far as the contract goes, I think this is really short money when you consider all the cost of actually funding it in a full, you know, as a part of the fire department. And I think at first I was like kind of scratching my head going, well, why are we paying but Grafton and Millbury aren't? But I get it, because if there's a lot of calls in a town, it's getting funded by the calls. And because we don't have enough calls, we've got to make up the difference in the service.
And as you recall, you know, you might not have been on the board at the time, but back 5-6 years ago, and I think Dave mentioned this, Grafton was willing to go alone because they were paying zero. And then Millbury and the town of Sutton would be on their own, and our cost would have gone through the roof. So it was important to keep those three towns together to keep it economical for MedStar. So that's a little bit of the background on that.
Yeah, so they still benefit because they don't have to pay anything.
Oh, yeah, no, listen, they're doing
Really,
great.
it's really for our benefit.
Yeah, Bob Spain called me and said, what are you doing? You want me to share in that cost? I'm like, Bob, I appreciate everything we get out of this. And to me, it beats the alternative significantly.
Yeah, absolutely. It makes total sense. We've already talked about the Millville, so I won't go any further there. The police department grant, you know, as as my colleagues have talked about, we hear in the news every day that more and more of the police calls that are coming in these days are mental health and other issues that are often probably very challenging for the police department. So it's just a sign of the times we're in. And I think just one question I have is, do we have an understanding of the percentage of calls that we get that are kind of more mental health or domestic issues?
I mean, off the top of my head, I can't.
No.
But I know that the chief talks about it more and more frequently.
Mm-hmm.
And I think Wendy mentioned the number of domestic violence over the last year and a half have skyrocketed. So yes, it's certainly an issue that the chief is trying to address through this grant and everything else. So, the exact number, I could get that to you.
Yeah, I mean, maybe when he comes in to talk about this at the time,
Yeah.
if you can have some of that data, that'd be great. It's just
Sure.
because I know I've heard him talk about the same thing, and I think it's just good for us to have some insight as to what they're dealing with. I think it's important so we can support them. The other question I have just around the grant itself. So after the grant runs out, then the grant money runs out, is it renewable or what's the cost?
Don't know
there?
those details. They may be. It may be a situation where the towns need to decide, depending upon how many towns participate in this, of what we're going to do. Are we going to re-up for this, which may be our burden? But to me, this is a little bit of money for great benefit. But we'll have to wait and see if we get the grant, first of all, and then when the grant runs out, what the town's position would be on, because you'll have a few years of history to kind of look back on and say, has it been worth it? And we'll all hear from the chief and everything else. So
Okay, thank you.
sure.
And then finally, just like to thank Brian Jamros for coming back to serve on the Finance Committee. Like we've said so many times, this town runs on people volunteering their time and just really being passionate about this town. So
Yeah.
I'd like to thank him. And that's all I have.
All right, thank you, Jonathan.
Thank you.
Jeff?
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Jim, thank you. And Shannon, thank you. We have a unique library situation here in town, so it's great that we have someone that's familiar with that and can accept it for what it is. So that's great, and I wish her well. The ambulance contract, 5 years with a 0 and then 2% raises is pretty good.
Yeah, we've gone the last 5 years at 98,760. I mean, every year it's just been putting the same number. So they've done well by us.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. The thing that's kind of counterintuitive to me is that, we don't have enough calls, but yet our experience rating on the health insurance keeps going up. So I'm not sure if there's any correlation between those two or not, but it just seems.
Those are municipal employees that are, I haven't quite figured out how that all works.
I just didn't know if there's a correlation there, that's all. Millville, we talked about, that's fine. The grant, I think, is great. I fully support that. And the other thing, as I thought about that and looked at it, I thought it was very timely that we've just had we've had a 100% increase in our diversification by hiring a second female in the department in the last 10 years, which I think hopefully will go a long way to, having maybe a less threatening kind of presence in situations like this. I'm not sure how it all works, but I'm assuming there might be some of that, and I'm glad that we've got more diversification now.
Our current group of officers are outstanding in de-escalating situations, male and female. They've done some incredible things that too much time to go into them, but de-escalating situations that could have gotten out of control,
right.
And that's really a tribute to the department and the officers, because they're young but they're talented.
Agreed. So. The COVID vaccine clinic for the kids is great. I know the schools are struggling with that right now, with the number of cases and that whole test and stay program that they have. And so I'm glad that hopefully we can maybe kind of get around the bend on this at some point. And finally, thank you to Brian Jamros for agreeing to sit on the Finance Warrant Committee. Now that there's actuaries on there, I know it's a really kind of a...
It makes you CPAs look.
Right, exactly. So
But can they do math in their head as quickly as you can?
they can,
They can.
believe you me.
They dream of math.
So that's all, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Not meaning to repeat all the points that my colleagues shared, but of course we have to extend a warm welcome. Well, actually, it's not even a welcome to Shannon, obviously. Just welcome aboard. It's great, and I look forward to hearing more of her involvement in the library, and also, of course, management meetings. That's always a good thing to hear. MedStar, yeah, this is really huge. I was around, with the last issue, and I know we were contemplating the costs of personnel and ambulances. And while you do get a little money on that back, because you can bill the insurance companies, again, it's that upfront cost and updating staffing and all the other issues that come through with it. And I like the point that you made that if we were to have to deal with that, we would have dealt with it. Chief Belcito would have assembled a top-rate team and would have kept the responses as efficient, as effective as they are now. But yeah, this I'm glad to hear that they work together. You see the collegiality whenever I pop into the fire department and the EMTs are there. They, to your point, they're treated like they're members of the staff, and it's great to know that they'll be around for a few more years. Even though our responses from the fire department have increased also over the course of the year. I think Chief Belcito did mention that. I don't remember if it was during a meeting or to me personally that, this last year there's been a spike. I think they met last year's numbers in the summertime. So, there's a lot of action going on the fire side as well. So having some stability and continuity, that's a good thing.
I mean, keep in mind, this ambulance contract, it still hasn't been finalized. But this is what they've presented to us, and we'll have a meeting probably in January to confirm it. But this is the way it's looking right now.
I'm glad to hear that they're at least willing to extend a hand of friendship and
Yeah.
try to keep the relationship in place. We've talked about Millville. I don't really have. I wish I could add something of value to the grant. I think it's a good thing, but of course I look forward to hearing more to Wendy's question, how it actually works, because I can't imagine that if you have to call someone in from Boston, if there's a situation. But again, we'll see how that plays out. And lastly, welcome to Brian, or welcome back to Brian. That's always a good thing. Before I go forward, I would also like to acknowledge that there are some correspondence in the packet, one of which came from Barry Lorian. This was in response to Jim's letter to MassDOT with the issue of that potential development on 146. We got a reply to that, so thank you, Jim, for sending the letter, and thank you to MassDOT for responding. And it also looks like we have a letter from the governor and the lieutenant governor in terms of us winning a recycled dividends program grant, $3,500 through the Sustainable Materials Recovery Program. I'm assuming that has something to do with the efforts down at the transfer station?
Exactly.
All right, well, we know Dave runs a very tight ship down there, so it's nice to see that his hard work is being recognized. So excellent work by everyone involved. All right, we are not going to adjourn this evening because we have to go to an executive session. And the purpose of tonight's executive session is to conduct strategy sessions in preparation for negotiations with non-union personnel, or to conduct collective bargaining sessions, or to contract negotiations with non-union personnel. So in order for us to do so, I believe we have to have a motion to go to executive session.
Chairman, did you want to go to announcements and roundtable and all that
Oh,
first?
yeah, I apologize. You're right. See, I'm so excited about going to executive session. I forgot the good stuff. So, yeah, before we do that, when we postpone that, we'll go to roundtable.
Mr. Chairman, just one thing. I did have an opportunity to work at Chain of Lights this past weekend. And, I've actually worked at Chain of Lights for a long time now, but usually I've been sort of stuck in one location cooking. This time, I got on the the trolleys. Well, it's interesting because when you're stuck at one location, it's like Chain of Lights happens and you don't go to Chain of Lights. You're just doing your thing. I haven't really been to Chain of Lights in a long time, but this year I did ride a trolley. So I got to, at least on one side of town, travel around and see a lot of the different locations that were hosting events. And, you know, it was really interesting. And I'll just say this, it's been very well organized. So the Gerard's down at Al's have been they've been doing it for a few years. They've done great. They've really worked hard, I think, to bring in more participants. This year, I know there were a couple of people that didn't for one reason or another. A lot of COVID issues, I think, that were sort of holding some people back. But, you know, I think they've continued to draw in more of the community. I think from appearances, it looks like it was pretty well attended, maybe more people than last year. Certainly, I think the buses and trolleys seem to be, you know, pretty busy, and a lot of people seem to go on their own. So I just wanted to thank them for the work, and hope the community enjoyed it. I think it was a good time. So thank you.
Thank you. Wendy?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to quickly echo Dave's point, it was really amazing, and I give the committee a boatload of credit for putting together such a great event, and it's so good to see events finally coming back at, you know, to some degree. So I'm pretty excited about that. And then just to sort of tack on to the issue of the grant for the mental health crisis, I just want people to remember that it's an ongoing concern, and, you know, we need to be able to relate to other people's issues. So I hope people think about that on a daily basis.
Thank you.
That's all I have.
Jonathan?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. No, I'd just like to thank, you know, all the volunteers and all the businesses that, and the organizations that really, you know, made the Chain of Lights happen. I think it's a signature event for Sutton that really kind of, in some ways, puts it on the map. And, you know, my family enjoys it every year, and I'm just grateful that it happens every year. Thank you.
Thank you. Jeff?
Mr. Chairman, just two things. One is on, as you're aware, because you were there, November 23rd, the state's annual Firefighters Award ceremony was held at Mechanics Hall. And Chief Balsito was awarded a Meritorious Conduct Recognition Award. And the ceremony was itself was emotional. It was moving. It was, you know, it was very humbling to see all the you know, these heroic acts that are that the firefighters, not just the chief, but just throughout the state, they do without a second thought. So, you know, I don't think the right word is congratulations to Chief Balsito for what he did this summer down at the Cape, but we just thank him for all his efforts and just for being there for us, and it means an awful lot. The second thing was, you know, I'm not sure how to really even approach this, but I was today's Tuesday, so Sunday, I was driving midday up to St. Mark's to help out with the giving tree sorting and so forth, and I saw on the side of the road a relatively large elf of some kind, and some, I think they were red tights, were they? And you know, I just wanted to kind of throw that out there, that, you know, that was a sight. I did not have an opportunity to take a picture, but believe me, I wanted to. So, that's all I have, Mr. Chairman.
Quite a sight.
Oh, it was.
It was quite a
Talk about mental health, right?
All of that one is Jesse.
Wow, it's pick on Jesse. Huh? That's all right.
Oh, that was you.
Oh, yeah. All right. I was going to ask Dave if he sang on the trolley, but you mentioned me in tights, so I can't even go down that route. All right. I do have a couple. First off, of course, you know, congratulations to the chief. That was awesome. I think it was the governor, Charlie Baker, who mentioned, like, you just can't make up these stories. Yeah. And it was so surreal, some of the events, including what Chief Balsito was involved in. I mean, it's the stuff that even Hollywood can't think of. Yeah. So it was definitely It was a beautiful venue. We were in Mechanics Hall, and I was very honored to participate and be there. Jim was there, and Dave was there, and John Kuchar was there, and other town employees were there. So, being there to support the chief. So, he's definitely a hero in my book. Next up, Jonathan and I, we attended an Eagle Scout review board for a Mr. Ethan Westbury, who's involved with Troop 243. That was an extraordinary applicant. This young man was just so impressive, and I believe the troop is going to be contacting Debbie in terms of the presentation of the certificate, as we usually do. I think it's going to be in March, but I'm sure Troop 243 will be in touch. Chain of Lights was awesome. To your point, yeah, so many years I got stuck at the trolley hub, just being in the center of things but not really being active. So this year I decided to do something different. I split my time. Half of it I spent going out and being able to visit the sites. I got to deal with, visit all the historical committees sites. I went to the museum, went to the blacksmith shop, went down to the schoolhouse, 8-lot schoolhouse, which is fantastic. Went to the First Congregational Church, went to Valancourts, and everywhere I went, there was just one thing in common. People were just having fun. They had smiles on their face. It felt like Christmas. It was just wonderful. So obviously I didn't get to go everywhere because my second half of my day I was down in the land of misfit toys down in the Dudley Genren. But it was just really great to see, and I'm looking forward to see what the committee brings to the town next year, because it was awesome this year, and it always can be better. And I'm sure, the people who are involved in volunteering their time to put that on, will bring their A game each and every year. So, job well done. Yes, this past Sunday I was helping fill the hat. It's something that the Sons of the American Legion do year after year, and we raised cash proceeds, and we use those funds in support of what we call From Our Family to Yours fund, and that is our charitable fund. We use that money to donate to other groups or entities in town that need a helping hand. This particular year, we bought the turkeys and all of the vegetables that were donated through the Food Pantry. So what we did in filling the hat is we were able to refill our coffers, as it were, as we look forward to Christmas and, of course, Easter. And you want to talk about a generous community? All total, in 4 hours of us wearing pink wonderful tights, the community donated over $2,600 cash. Wow. So thank you to everybody who drove through. I mean, it was a banner day, and every single penny is going to go to good use. So thank you, thank you, thank you. And lastly, the Food Pantry. I did not have a chance to speak to Michelle, but we are still in the holiday season. So if you're doing your shopping, think about Christmas-type items. Obviously, pie crusts, pie fillings, canned vegetables. Those do go a long way. Snacks, desserts, cookie mixes. Also helpful. And always, cleaning supplies, tissues, paper towels, things along those lines.
Jesse, can I ask you a question?
Sure.
I guess I could ask Michelle, but I'll ask you while you're here. Do you know if the pantry accepts animal-related items for families who may have animals, unopened dog food,
It's
cat
a
food?
spacing issue.
Okay.
I know last year we did a huge food drive at Market 32, and we did get some bags of animal food, dog food, cat food, and I think Michelle worked to find good homes for that. But the problem is the food pantry is only so big. So I am sure there are other charitable groups out there. I believe
Worcester Animal Rescue League will accept all
Yeah, exactly.
items. I just didn't know if the food pantry may, but that answers my question.
All right. Again, she may be able to give you something more specific in terms of what she does if something comes in. But
Okay, thank you.
it's a great question. Thank you. All right. So as I said a few minutes ago, before I forgot the highlight of the evening, I'd entertain a motion for us to go into an executive section.
Mr. Chair, I'd make a motion to enter into executive session under Mass General Law, Chapter 30A, Section 21, subsection number 2, with the sole purpose of re-entering upon meeting for adjournment only.
Second.
All right. We need to do a roll call vote.
David Hall, aye.
Wendy Mead, aye.
Jonathan Anderson, aye.
Jeff Bannon, aye.
And Jesse Lemanik, aye. Have a good night, everyone.
Thank you.
Recording stopped.